Good to see you. We made it to the 15th and final part in our review of the interrogation of Chris Watts. It's been a strange journey through human nature. We've seen the best and the worst of it. Now we're going to tie up some loose ends and answer some big final questions that are still open. Where we left off in part 14 was delving into Chris's news story. And if you're just joining us, it sounded a little bit like I looked into the grocery store and I saw an orange in the orange crate. Then I looked over to the other side and I saw a cashier accepting cash. So, just blind, rage, I just ran in there and I strangled the janitor who was mopping the floor. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. The orange did this, the cashier did that. What else can you do? And that, more or less, is the story he told to make himself look good. In actuality, he is much, much worse, as we'll get to. They're trying to figure out why Chris disposed of his daughters in the oil tanks at his work site. And this is where we figure out what Chris's new favorite phrase is. I didn't know what else to do. It's not quite a new mask. It's more like a security blanket to cover up the parts of the monster that are showing from behind the mask. Because everything that comes out of his mouth is betraying the mask that he's trying to wear of the family man who went temporarily insane and now does something he regrets. Everything he says is showing the monster from behind that mask. So now he's coming up with this new phrase as a security blanket to cover up the monster that's showing. So it ends up sounding like, why did you bring them to your work site to dispose of them? I didn't know what else to do. Remember in the beginning when he first started saying it, right after he admitted to murdering Shanann, and when they're asking him what he did with the bodies, he was blubbering it like, I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. And now he's getting really comfortable saying it, almost to the point where he's savoring it and just loving the flavor of it, to where by the end of the interrogation, he's almost proclaiming it triumphantly like, so why did you put them in the oil tanks? I didn't know what else to do. And why do you look like the illegitimate son of Ryan Gosling and a xenomorph? I didn't know what else to do. So when they realize that Chris is using this new phrase, where he's basically just playing dumb, this is believable. This is way more believable than playing the part of the loving family man who doesn't know what happened to his family. Way more believable than playing the part of the loving family man who made a mistake and now lives in anguish about the mistake that he wants to make right. He doesn't understand at all how those mindsets work, but somehow he really gets into the role of the complete idiot who didn't know what to do, has no idea what was going on, and saw no other options than the actions he took. Somehow he is very attuned with that kind of a person. It's still a bunch of baloney, but this is the role he seems to play most believably. And the most people seem to believe that he didn't know what to do and he was just out of control. The complete idiot. So, now that he's using this security blanket to convincingly play dumb, Graham and Tammy pretty much see that this is the end of getting information out of Chris. And they say, all right, we're done with this lump of shit. Tie him up like a bag of trash and throw him into the hole where he deserves to spend the rest of his life. We're going to go collect evidence now and use that against him instead. And they do. They collect evidence that I've used all throughout this series to illuminate some of the things that are said in the interrogation and what the true meaning is behind them. And they finish up the case and they go back to their families that they didn't murder. So, some of the questions that get answered now. Why the tanks? Why did he put them in the tanks? Because even for a cold-blooded, careless, compassionless psychopath who just wants to get the murder done with quickly and cleanly as soon as possible and move on with his life, It doesn't make practical sense because that's 2 extra steps and 2 extra places where evidence can be found. Why wouldn't he just throw them all into one hole and bury them? That's quicker and easier. And there's 2 different modes of thinking on this. And this has taken me the longest to figure out because it doesn't make any sense. And the first mode is he wanted to satisfy a sick curiosity because the final seed to his murderous plan that we're going to go over that comes out in this interrogation is, when I worked with industrial tanks, it was a regular part of the language about someone falling in, someone being thrown in, or someone dropping something in. That would come up almost every day when you work with industrial-sized tanks. So I guarantee you that whoever showed Chris the tanks and trained him on them in the first place, on that first day, they were saying something like, don't drop something in there, you'll never get it out. Or, hey, you ever want to get away with murder, you can put a body in there. No one will ever see it, right? And from everything we've covered about Chris in this series, we know what he was thinking to that. He wasn't saying it out loud, but he was thinking, yeah, everyone takes it as a joke, and no one would suspect me of actually doing it, and I would get away with it. And I bet that first day he worked on those tanks, he was thinking about his daughters fitting through that hole and going into the tanks and never being seen. It was a joke to the coworker. Chris played it off like a joke on the outside and internally was saying, I could really do it and get away with it. So that was a seed. But then when it came time to water the seed, in 2 months before he committed the crime, and he was making the plan to actually carry it out, and he was watering that seed, why did he actually do it? Because it's, as I said, extra time, extra steps, extra chance of getting caught, knowing the coworkers are showing up. And that goes to the other mode of thinking of it was his backup plan, because Shanann's plane was delayed by the dust storm in Arizona. Her plane was delayed. He was running behind, and the girls were unexpectedly alive. He tried to kill everyone in the house. He smothered the girls first, and then after he was done strangling Shanann, he found out that the girls were still alive. So now, the part that he never talks about is what he was thinking while he was going from cleaning up Shanann and bringing everyone to the work site and disposing of the bodies. He never talks about his mindset during that time. So we're going to talk about it now. What he was thinking while he was trying to execute his many-leveled plan of cleaning up the murder while his unexpectedly alive daughters are following him around, asking him questions, crying, which is the most distracting thing any parent can go through, and especially on a day where Chris had so many extra things to do and trying to squeeze it into his regular schedule. So he was forgetting things while trying to figure out what he's going to do with these girls now, because they're not dead. He was expecting them to all be dead, and he could just throw them all into that hole. So on the drive there, while they're probably asking him questions about what he's doing still, crying, asking him, I need to use the bathroom, I'm hungry. I doubt that they were just quiet the whole way there like he tries to portray to make himself look better than he really is. What is he going to do with these girls now? So first things first, he has to get rid of the evidence that he murdered Shanann, and he can deal with the girls later. What if the girls come back a second time? He says in Letters from Christopher, the hole he dug for Shanann seemed a lot shallower when he put her body in there. He thought it was deeper when he first dug it. Then when he put Shanann in there, it was shallower than he expected. So what if he puts the girls in this shallow grave and they come back a second time while his co-workers are there? His daughters come out of the shallow grave still alive, even one of them. How does that look? If he puts them in the tanks, they're not going to come back, and the fumes from being in the tanks will keep them unconscious until they're dead. He says that in Letters from Christopher 2. Had to put the girls in the tanks so they wouldn't come back a second time. He doesn't give it in the context that I just put it in. He gives it in the context of just a bunch of stuff that's out of his control. He didn't know what he was doing or why he was doing it. He was just following what he thought were good spirits, which is completely ridiculous. Makes a lot more sense in this context. He wanted to kill them all in the house and then put them all in the same hole because that would be quicker and cleaner. But he has to go back to that original seed that he thought of a year or two earlier of putting the girls in the tanks. So now he was going to satisfy that sick fascination and also ensure that the girls would not come back a second time. Because imagine how it would look if they clawed their way out of a shallow grave and were still alive after he attempted to murder them twice. He had no problem doing that, but absolutely unacceptable to him is people finding out about it. Oops, I'm sorry, Chris. Did I let everyone know? Sorry about that. And if anyone is still on the fence about where Chris stands as a human being, we have the most sickening example of the Chris Watts rule to come out of the entire interrogation. When Tammy brings up to Chris that they're telling us the hatches at the top of the tanks are so small you could barely fit an arm in there. Did you really put the girls in the tanks? Did you have to push or... And this pathetic parasite says, not really, no. If he really is who he was pretending to be, would that not be the most horrific image from your entire life? Having to push them through the openings in the tanks that were too small for their bodies? Because we know he did have to push. Bella had injuries from being shoved through one of the holes. Cece had hair left around the rim of the hole. They were too small to fit. He had to push to squeeze them through. And when recalling what would be the most horrific, disturbing image from any compassionate father's life, who would probably break down at the thought of it and not be able to answer, he just says, not really, no. So, I can think about all this, and I finally did get the answer to the question that I raised way back in part 1, about 4 hours ago, if you're listening to all these in order. Remember, I first dipped my toes into this case because I was wondering about Chris Benoit still. Why did he murder his wife and kids? We'll never know because he murdered himself, too, at the end of it. So I dipped my toes in the Chris Watts case to maybe get an answer to why Chris Benoit did that. And I did get that answer. We'll never know for sure, but I got enough of an answer that I can at least understand it. Chris Benoit really was what Chris Watts was only pretending to be. Chris Benoit really was the loving family man who went temporarily insane and committed a crime that he couldn't live with. He literally couldn't live with it. He killed himself afterwards. He really did feel that remorse, regret, and anguish, and he could not live with himself anymore. Chris Watts not only can live with himself, not only was he happy with himself for the 3 days after he treated his family that way, not only was he satisfied with what he did, not only does he feel absolved of responsibility and unresponsible, not only does he think he's a good guy, he will never give up this presentation of himself as a good guy. And that makes him on the lowest rung of the murder ladder. Not only is he willing to betray the people who love and trust him the most, that he is responsible for taking care of in the worst possible way, he will carry on presenting himself as a good guy who loved his family. That is the lowest of the low, and compared to that, Chris Benoit, he's still on the murder ladder. He's still in the spectrum of murder. But compared to Watts, he moves up a rung or two. He really was what Chris Watts is only pretending to be. So we answered that question. And as far as Chris Watts, I can think of no better image to end on than him alone in the interrogation room with nothing left but the box of tissues to wipe away the tears he's crying for himself and no one else, looking at the picture of the daughters who in their short lives were better humans than he will ever be for the rest of his miserable, pathetic life. No matter how many Bible verses he quotes, no matter how many scriptures he sends to fellow inmates, no matter if he even becomes a chaplain, he will never equal the heroics or the humanitarianism of his 3- and 4-year-old daughters. Even Nico, at the age of -5 months, was more of a man than his father will ever be for the rest of his miserable, pathetic life. And I think it's time for us to move on from this interrogation and back to our lives. Where I'm moving on to with this channel is I'm going to go back to literary stuff for a little while. I'm considering some of the recommendations in the comments for other true crime cases. The reason I diverted from what I normally do to do this case is because I've been writing about the main theme for over 20 years in my fiction, which is the difference between what people say, how they act, and what they think. When those three things don't line up, there's a story there. There's a mystery to be solved. And to me, literature, good literature, has always been the best at delineating those differences in a satisfying way. You can say more about people through fictional characters than you can say about people in the real world. So I'm going to go back to that for a little while. Leave any comments of any suggestions you have for me to review anything else. And if you're interested, if you haven't already gone over and checked out my novel, Children of the Light, it unravels in pretty much the same way that the Chris Watts case does. It's a completely different story, but in the same mode of what in the world is going on here? None of this makes sense. Why are these people behaving this way? And then the center of reason, Officer Foley, has to navigate her way through this completely crazy, elaborate, nonsensical plan full of evil people who are making no sense with their behavior, and their thoughts and their actions don't match up. Why are they doing this? What's going on? And through the people she meets along the way, they're able to unravel this huge, insane mystery. And that's why I was able to have so much to say about the Chris Watts case, because I'm familiar with the theme and with the way that the mystery is unraveled and resolved. So as far as the Chris Watts case is concerned, with this interrogation, his master plan has been revealed. No matter what he says for the rest of his pathetic, parasitic life, his master plan has been revealed. And I'm ready to move on. We can learn a lot from this case. We can revisit it to remind ourselves of some of the red flags so that we can sidestep some of the dangers inherent in people like this, because by no means is he the first, nor will he be the last. There are a lot of people down there on that bottom rung of the ladder with him, and always will be. So thank you for following along with my series, and I will see you in the next video.